Q&A time at the House of Power. Welcome back to the Power Public YouTube channel. We haven't done a Q&A in ages. Since we set up our YouTube membership, we were actually reserving the Q&A for that. So if you'd really like to support our channel, head on over there and sign up. It's a great way to show us some love. To all the guys that have been following along for the last few months, really blowing YouTube up, we really appreciate all the thumbs up, all the subscribers. It really means a lot. So on to the questions. So the first question is from Mr. B, and he's asking, why is the rear bumper bar different on the DD2 than all the other karts and classes? Okay, so Mr. B, DD2 has been designed specifically by Rotax. They created their own rules, and back in the day when the DD2 was released, they had their own karts, the Rotax branded DD2 kart. Now all the manufacturers are on board, and it's been a bit of a carryover, which was the DD2 designed rear bar. Following on from this question is another one from Eric Chin, who was asking, why does the DD2 have a 40mm axle when all the other karts are running 50 in the high performance categories? And the reason is the same thing. The engine was designed around a 40mm axle. It actually goes through the engine, so I guess there's only so many sized bearings and gears that the engineers could work with, and it seems like the 40mm fits the purpose perfectly. And look, it's a high horsepower category. The karts handle exceptionally well, and all the karts are in the same boat with the 40mm, so it's neither a win or a loss. It's just what it is. So get out there and dominate some races. All right, so the next question comes from Jay Townsend, and he's asking, does the caster and camber change once you add the driver into the kart on the ground? Yes, Jay, it does. If you put your snipers on the stub axles and then sit in the kart, you'll actually see it bump toe in and negative camber, or less positive camber, depending where you are on the sniper scale. Now, it's not that critical because every time you sit in it, it's going to be the same. So your caster and camber are really static measurements that you're using in relation to yourself. So obviously you've got the standard set up straight ahead, and then it's turning too aggressively on the way into a corner. Okay, from the standard setting, we need to wind in some negative camber. How much the kart bumps when you sit in it is the same whether you've put negative in or you're at the standard setting. And vice versa, it's not responsive enough, you're going into positive camber. Okay, the kart was at neutral, it doesn't matter. We just need a little bit more positive before we roll out the gate to make it, when it's on the track, a little bit more responsive. So sniper adjustments are relative only to the, your specific problems. Okay, there's no real magic bullets. You can't always wind negative in. You can't always wind the positive out to 15mm or whatever. You've just got to really tune the kart for the conditions and for your own driving style. All right, the next question is in regards to Senior Max engine, and it comes from BBM Motor. What is the max RPM you should aim for at the end of the longest straight on your local track for a Evo Rotax engine? Now, what I would say is, depending on if the straight is downhill or uphill, the downhill, you're going to over rev the engine a little bit. I'm looking for about 14.6, 14.5, somewhere around that. It's going to have a rev limiter about that. You'll hear the engine starting to cut out. Now, if you are going uphill, you might only be able to gear it to get it around 13.5 to 14,000 because the engine's going to stop pulling and you're not going to get that over rev situation. So depending on the straight, if it's downhill, 14.5, if it's uphill, 13.5. Okay, shout out to an OG fan, Chris Ramnouth, all the way over in Trinidad. Hey mate, great question in regards to the steering column hitting the fuel tanks. Now, I think you're talking about the older style karts with the center fill tank. I have seen that a little bit. The steering column is really close. How I'd fix that, geez, you could make sure you're not running the extendo steering column. There is some 2 columns on the Tony kart you can get. One has a shorter Ackerman, one has a longer one. Otherwise, you could cut the bottom off the steering bell and run the top holes. I know it's a bit rough, but I mean, it would stop it from hitting the fuel tank. Other than that, you could run the smaller 3-litre fuel tank. That would solve all your clearance issues. Otherwise, if you can update to the newer karts, they don't seem to have any problems at all with the steering column running into the fuel tank, but it is a pretty pricey exercise. So realistically, your best option is change to a smaller 3-litre fuel tank over the big Tony kart center fill 8-litre fuel tank that came out in the 2015 or 20, 12 to 13 models. Okay, so the next question is from Faris Hosh, and he's asking, is there a difference between a 2015 kart and a 2020? Okay, so the 2015 chassis are a little bit outdated now. If you put a fast driver in them, I'm sure you could get some really crazy good lap times, but trying to find a 2015 chassis that hasn't had its life used up, so no one's been in the track in it and jumped all the curbs and scrubbed it all out. So to try to find a brand new old stock kart from 2015 would be pretty hard, if not impossible. So I'd say no, steer clear of the 2015s. If you've got the budget, buy yourself a brand new kart in 2020, because you just know that no one's touched it, it's 100% yours, and whatever damage you do to it is from you, and it's going to go awesome. Okay, Elliot Turner 69 has asked, what is the best brand of tyres? Okay, Elliot, there's tons of tyres in go-karting, and I can't really pinpoint a best tyre. I personally like the Bridgestone YLR because it's soft and sticky, but it doesn't last very long. So really, hunt around for that stickiest tyre you can in your area, buy it, and go and buzz some laps. Otherwise, stick to your class tyres. For us here, it's a Dunlop DFM. It's an excellent tyre. It's a medium grip. You get good life and good grip, whereas when you go to those stickier compounds, you are only going to see a good 60 laps or 60 kilometers of good high performance, and then you're going to start dropping off with your tyre degradation. So if you've got heaps of money and there's no rules, get yourself some soft and stickies, otherwise stick with your class tyres. So we've got another question in regards to the Rotax engine. It comes from Dave in the Netherlands, and he's asking, the 11-tooth clutch drum is making some noise when he starts and stops the engine. Now the Rotax engine, especially with the 11-tooth, we don't run the O-ring on those, and the clutch drum can move around a little bit, and it's just tapping on the ring gear. It's perfectly fine. When the clutch shoes throw out, it engages into the shoes and makes the assembly all lock up, and there's no movement at all, so I wouldn't worry about that. You can replace the bearings more regularly. On the 11 there's a bush. The bush gets worn with time, it's only plastic, so you can replace that, and that will stop that noise sometimes. Otherwise, more lubrication will make the bearing last a bit longer, which will stop some of the noise as well. Okay, so the next question is from Westy, and he's asking about roll time. When do you know you've got enough, and how do you tell when you've had enough roll time and not enough? Now we're talking about rolling from the end of the brake zone down past the apex of a corner, so maybe on a hairpin corner, and traditionally with the Rotax engines. And the best way to sort of break down whether you're having too much or not enough roll time, you can only really sort of guess as to not enough, is probably you're getting on the throttle before the apex of the corner. And if you're doing that, you might be entering too slow or using too much brakes on the way into the corner, so you're traveling too slow. So you're like, oh crap, I've got to get on the throttle. And you're stabbing the throttle on before you finish steering. So get it into the corner, well, brake, steer down to the apex, get it into the corner, and once you're at the apex, pick up that throttle there. And in the Rotax, you'll know if you've got on it too early, because it really bogs the engine down generally. And if you're too late, maybe you're just losing too much time off the corner to your competitors. The next question is from Tommy Steinford Official, and Tom is asking about what Rotax jetting app do I use and recommend, and do you change it differently for a restricted kart, which is the ones we race here in Southeast Queensland. Tom, what I say is I don't really use a jetting app myself personally. I've always sort of really stuck with the same jets summer to winter up here. We don't have that huge variation in sort of humidity and temperature like you do, say, down in Victoria. So if you do have huge variations in your weather conditions in one day, maybe a jetting app would be an advantage. For us here, it's not, so I can't really recommend anything. We use a 118, 120, 122, and it's normally the same depending on the track we're at due to the relative distance from sea level. So if we're at sea level, we've got the 122 jet, the richer of the three, and then as we go up in 200 meter increments, we'll go down one jet size for each one of those. Now, if you're in the open category, you're normally 1 to 2 jets richer, so you'd start in that 125 range and work your way down to a 120 when you go to the elevated racetracks. Shout out to kartingforum.co.uk. They've got a great question in regards to Rotax rebuild times. Mate, we had some engines in here and they're absolute weapons. We're pushing 15 hours easy out of our Rotax Max top end rebuilds. You can actually go less than that if you've got heaps of money and you don't care and you want brand new pistons all the time. We can do that, but we've got top line drivers racing them all the way up to 15 hours for that piston and ring. 10 if you're fussy, 5 if you're ridiculous, but realistically they do have great longevity, so you can really get some extra hours in those Rotax engines. Now you're going to watch those bottom end rebuilds. In the open category with the Rotax Max, let's keep it down in the 40 to 45 hour range. They can go a little bit more, but once they don't make it, everything goes wrong fast, because you're obviously going to wreck your conrod, bearings, but also too, it can also wreck the cylinder when those engine parts come through the trannies and get stuck on the piston. So Raphael is asking about O-ring chains and the best way to clean them. Mate, all I do is I spray some degreaser on a rag and then pull the chain through the rag just to wipe off any dirt that's on the outside. Theo's asking how to lubricate axle bearings and how often. Okay, I do them every time I come in from the pits, and I use WD-40. It's a light oil and it doesn't hang around for very long. So if you're going to do it, make sure you do it very, very often. Actually, every session. Okay, so the next question is from Daniel C. Racing, and I think he's from England because he's asking about Rotax engines and £1,300 for a brand new one versus £1,000 to rebuild it. Well, if the engine's an actual weapon and you really like it, I'd pay the money to rebuild it. Otherwise, yeah, you can sell it off for half that and buy yourself a brand new one. It might be a little bit cost effective. Rock Speed's asking what's the best chassis for KA4 and KA3. Okay, two different age groups generally speaking. We're going to use the Racer Tony Kart 30mm for KA3, and then we're going to use the Nordics 28mm for KA4 Junior. You can use the bigger kart if you're a taller driver in KA4. It works fine here in Australia with the sticky tyres. But if you're in a different area of Australia where they use a harder compound, I definitely recommend the 28mm chassis. The next question comes from Ayrton. He's asking what's my favourite track in Australia. Well, I can tell you my favourite go-karting track that I've been to is probably Toowoomba, and the one I most want to go to that I've seen is probably Dubbo. And my favourite race car track, yeah, it's the ultimate Mount Panorama. You can't go past the legend. So if you're loving these videos, don't forget to subscribe, turn on those notifications, and if you really want to support the channel, you can go over to our YouTube membership section. Now we are going to be running some Q&As again, and it's going to be exclusive for those guys. So if you do have a very technical question and you want to get into the details of how to fix your problems, we're only going to do that one-on-one over on our subscriber membership, and you go over there and do it right now. Okay, so the next question comes from Kyle, and he's asking some tips for going from a restricted category into open. Well, what I would say that I see a lot is that the restricted drivers struggle with the extra power and extra roll time. So they'll get the speed off too much on the way in and get on the throttle too early, because that's kind of what you can do in a restricted class, because you're sort of down on power and up on grip. But when you go to open, you don't have that same ratio. So because you got the extra power and almost the same grip level, it becomes quite difficult to get the kart to stop and steer, and then that's where the time's lost. So really focus on getting on the brakes hard and rolling through the corner to the apex, and then picking up that throttle a little bit later in the open categories. We got a question from Ibo, and he's asking about my knowledge on Belgian circuits. I'm gonna have to say I don't know anything about racing in Belgium. I've never been there, but I'm gonna go check it out on the internet. Next question's from RC Fun, and he's asking on which turns you should trail brake and which turns not. Okay, so RC Fun, when you're pushing the limits, you're gonna trail brake on hairpin corners, because you wanna be able to brake at the very last second. And if you do that, you can actually trail brake down as you start turning in, say, the first quarter of the turn. And then once you get the kart sort of on its rails and it's starting to steer, you're going to lift off the brake as you increase your steering angle. Otherwise, you're going to slide in the rear. Now, you did mention that you have been doing that when you're coming off the brakes. So you might be steering too much and getting off the brake too late, and then that's making the back kick out. So you could probably try getting off the brakes earlier, from what I'm hearing in your question. The next question is from Dylan M Sport, and he's asking if the DKS is legal. The guys at the DKS have reviewed the international and local rules and feel that the DKS system falls within them. They are working with the karting bodies in all different areas to get the homologation through. So it's currently being used, yes. Is it certified, homologated by the FAA? No, but they're currently in negotiations as we speak. So the next question from Thomas is asking about axles or rear axles and knowing when to change them out. So obviously you want to have a problem first. There's no magic axle for every track and every condition. The standard N axle in a Tony kart is the best at covering most of the conditions, But then if you're a heavier driver, lighter driver, hot day, cold day, rain, or whatever, you're going to come up with an idea to change the axle. So if you don't know what the axle change is going to do, just leave the N axle in it. But normally if you're looking for the last 1/10 of a second or 2/10 of a second to the leader of the race, that's when you're going to start changing your axles. Now, as the temperature gets hotter and stickier, you might need to run to a softer axle or a stiffer axle, but you're just going to have to experiment. I don't know your actual track and tyre and conditions, so for me to tell you to put a hard or a soft axle in compared to the medium for the conditions that you're in, I'd just be guessing or lying to you. So I can't do that, but I would recommend getting one grade up and one grade down, so one softer, one harder, and going to your local track and testing those over and over again, summer, autumn, winter, and spring, and working out which axle on your tyre for your conditions works best at that time of day. Okay, Shane Adams has a great question in regards to X30 gearbox oil. Shane, you can just chuck in some automatic transmission fluid from your local auto parts store. That'll be about 10 bucks a litre, and you'll have enough for many, many gear changes on the Rotax and the X30 engines. So the last question is from Armando, and he's asking about the Rotax Max, how to drive them, how to be awesome. Well, it's probably a little bit too complex for a Q&A session, but you can go out and check our Racing Rituals tutorial series where we teach all the fundamentals of driving. Now there's going to be a link in the description below. We've had great feedback, so go and check it out. Okay, so there you have it. I know these question and answer sessions go for ages, so if you're still here, thanks heaps for hanging out. If you've got any more questions, we'll be running these again, and you can put those questions if you subscribe to our YouTube membership. We are going to be running more Q&As and go in more depth and more details for the guys that do sign up. So head on over. The link will be in the description below. Otherwise, if you haven't had enough of us yet, or me specifically, you can go and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Power Republic. Or you can go to our amazing website, www.powerrepublic.com.au. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. To all those guys who've been following on, first question is from Mr. B, and he's asking, why are the DD2 rear bars different to the standard cuts? And also too, we have another question. Cut. Okay, so the next question's from our good subscriber. My response. Okay, so if you're loving the Q&A, oh no, I'm not going to say that. And the guy's asking, that guy. Okay, so Shane Adams. I was like, oh, and I waffled off. Anyway, whatever. One hammers. Boom. How'd you like that?